Before we dive into today's episode, I have something truly special to share. Next September, I'll be leading an intimate women's retreat through the south of France and northern Italy, and you're invited. Picture this: mornings exploring the colorful markets of the French Riviera, afternoons sipping wine, and a hotel view with golden Mediterranean sunsets. Whether you love photography, food, or just want to reconnect with your playful creative self, this trip is designed for you. Spots are limited, so if all this sounds like your kind of adventure, please visit tourwithabsolutely.com and look for the tour France and Italy with Crystal. You can also send me a message or check out the show notes. Claudine Hemingway is a descendant of famed writer Ernest Hemingway. We bumped into each other at a party and decided to team up and dive deep into French history, but with a twist, by bringing a spotlight to those lesser-known creatives in France. This is History with a Hemingway. Welcome back to Paris History, Avec Hemingway, and today we're talking about the Bastille. And you may not know anything about that, but Claudine's going to teach us everything in this two-part series, so make sure you tune in next week to learn about the second half of the history of the Bastille.
So the reason I wanted to do this is because just this last weekend, on Friday, was 14 Juillet. We don't call it Bastille Day. That's a very American and a thing they do in England, but we don't call it that here, but which is kind of why I wanted to make this episode. But we just celebrated that here on Friday. It was my very first one in France, and I was so excited and even figured out a little hack of how you could do it, which I'll tell you later. But the Bastille, as we know it, was a prison. And it's over there. The Place de la Bastille is where it was. It was first a Bastide, which is where the word Bastille comes from, or Bastille as in English. It was at the Porte Saint-Antoine, which that street, the Rue de Rivoli, turns into the Rue Saint-Antoine. And that is the street that goes right there. It's the main street off of there. That Bastide was destroyed in 1356. And in 1367, Charles V wanted a castle and an arsenal built there to protect the city. So much like the Louvre was 200 years before that, the Louvre was created because it was created to do, basically, it was part of the fortified wall. And that was literally the edge of Paris, what the Louvre is. And now it's essentially the center of Paris. And so then you see that was the Philippe Auguste. Then you have the Charles V wall. And so that one's out a little bit further, but still even, the Bastille is definitely not on the edges of Paris anymore. And so that's what it was originally created. On April 22nd, 1370, the very first stone was laid by the provost, Hugues Aubrier. And then the first version of it, it had a big ditch around it, which is basically a moat. A moat has water. A ditch obviously does not. It had a huge ditch around it and had 4 towers. It would then be added onto, and they would have 8 towers. And each of these towers had their own name, which I think is interesting. There was the Tour de Coin, which means corner. So that was on the corner of Rue Saint-Antoine. The Tour de Chapelle, it replaced a chapel that was once there. The Tour of the Treasury, because Henry IV moved the royal treasury that was housed there in the tower in 1580. And then Marie de Medici spent it all after he died. The Tour de la Comté, and there's not them named after the cheese, but the Tour du Bertaudier was named after the mason who was working on that tower, and he killed himself by jumping from the building into the ditch.
Oh my gosh, it's horrible.
So you see, has a tower, I guess, named after him. The Tour de la Bazinière was named for Bertrand de la Bazinière. He was the treasury of the savings, and he was arrested at the same time as Nicolas Fouquet, which we'll talk about, in 1661, and both of them were locked up there for 4 years. There was the Tower of the Well, and then the Tower of Liberty. In 1380, when the Parisians attacked it, it got its name because they were saying "Liberté, Liberté," and so they decided to name the tower Liberty. I mean, these are like some of the weird names they have for people name their kids now.
So creative,
but they're very creative. But it's funny. It's like, what should we call that one? Let's just call it Liberty. I mean, some of them, like if you go to Mont Saint Michel, there's all these different towers and stuff. There's a Claudine Tower at Mont Saint Michel, but they all have obviously very important and interesting names.
Yeah, obviously very important.
Very important. But Charles V had locked up Hugues Aubrier there when he was the provost, and he was put to build this thing, and then he later ended up being locked up into his very own tower. It was in 1470 that the Bastille was then turned into a prison, and that's pretty much what we've always known it as, is a prison. And it was Henry IV. He moved his treasury there. He named Maximilien du Sully. He was named the governor of the Bastille in 1602. And Sully is the one that, when we talked about back in May, we did the episode about those last moments of Henry IV's life, and he was on his way to go see Maximilien du Sully. And the fact that I love it is that they had the same birthday, about 12 years in between there when they were born. But they were very good friends, and he was on his way to see his friend Sully when he was killed.
Oh man, all the connections.
I know everything. It doesn't really take much to connect everything when it comes to Paris history. But Louis XIII and Cardinal de Richelieu, Richelieu, who really loved to have that prison because he used it to basically locked up anybody that disagreed with him. It was turned into a state prison. So at that point, then, the king was putting everybody there. There was one very famous resident that lived there in 1698, The Man in the Iron Mask. And I think most people know of that because there's a movie. I think Leonardo DiCaprio was in it.
Yeah.
But there's also the Alexander Dumas book. And there's lots of theories, like this really was a person. You could go online and you could read a million different theories. There's theories that it was a twin brother of Louis XIV. If you watch the Versailles TV show, they tried to make it sound like it was actually Louis's actual father, that basically, had sex with his mother, and then they locked him away because then he wouldn't, Louis, of course, wouldn't be king then. And there's even, people think it's Nicolas Fouquet. There's all these other things. So it just depends on what book you're reading or what movie you're watching, but it really was a real thing that happened. And this guy was locked away. We don't know who it was. And he had this mask, this iron mask, and Voltaire wrote about it. And Voltaire said that it had a spring on the chin so that he had to keep the mask on at every moment of the day, even when he was eating. And this spring would be able to do it so he could move his mouth.
I mean, that's absolutely horrific. And actually, if you go to Cannes, there's an island called Sainte Marguerite off the coast of Cannes. Yeah. And the prison there is where they kept him most of the time. And you can visit it. We visited it. Actually, the island is beautiful, but it's pretty crazy. You can also visit this weird castle prison where they kept him.
Yeah, so he first appeared in Sainte Marguerite. This is where he's first appeared in the writings on April 30th, 1687. And then he made his way up to Louis XIV, sent him up here to Paris. And then he died there in the Bastille on November 19th, 1703. He was buried in a grave nearby under a different name. So nobody would know who it was because obviously, they weren't telling who he was. And so now his bones would be part of the catacombs.
I really wonder who he was. We'll never know.
We'll never know. Well, maybe someday if his bones are in the catacombs, they'd have to, it'd be really interesting if somebody went through there and took a piece of every bone and then did DNA.
I think that would be so impossible.
Considering there's like 2 million people down there.
Yeah, there's too many people.
But we could find out all sorts of interesting things. But could you imagine how much money that would cost to do that?
Yeah, it's not happening.
I bet there could be an app on your phone. So by some point, like in 5 years, there could be an app on your phone and you could point it at something and it'll tell you the DNA.
We're just waiting for that moment to arrive.
I bet it could happen anytime now. Look at how our history would just take a whole nother step up.
Seriously, we are skyrocketing with technology.
Yes, Paris.
Yes. Paris app.
So, but one of the most famous people, Voltaire actually spent some time there, but somebody that I am fascinated with, and we actually talked about this guy on a different podcast that we did about great places to have your wedding when we did it like 2 years ago. And this is a gentleman that I'm obsessed with, Nicolas Fouquet. On June 18th, 1663, he was arrested. But we'll back up a little bit because he was born on January 27th, 1615. In 1653, he became the superintendent of finance. He came from a very wealthy family. His first wife died just after childbirth. He got married to a second woman, and she was also very wealthy. By 1661, after the Cardinal Mazarin, he was the wealthiest man in France.
Wow.
And so Nicolas Fouquet in 1641 bought some land a little ways outside of Paris. And in 1653, he built a chateau there, and he named it Vaux-le-Vicomte.
We know that place.
And Vaux-le-Vicomte, if you have not gone, definitely go. We should do a whole episode just about Vaux-le-Vicomte because it's so cool, and it's totally go there. Like right now, Versailles. If you want to go to Versailles this summer, you would only go to Versailles if you have a death wish. It is insanity right now. I've been out there 2 or 3 times with clients, and it's so many people, and it's so hot, and it's just kind of miserable. So get Versailles, go to Vaux-le-Vicomte. But he bought this and had this built, and he tapped 3 very, very prominent people at that time. Louis Laveau, who was an architect, Charles Lebrun, the artist and decorator, and then André Le Nôtre. These 3 are very famous names that I see just about every other day when I'm doing research. And he held a huge party at this place, at his property, and he on August 17th, 1661, he invited Louis the 14th and to come to this party. And when he did this, Louis comes with 700 of his friends, and they all came out there, and he was just blown away, like, because he just wanted to show off and be like, oh my God, look at them having this party for you. Molière was there. Jean de La Fontaine, they both performed for the very first time ever for the king. Vaux-le-Vicomte, and it's not a huge place. It's not big at all. I mean, it's tiny compared to Versailles.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably about the same size as the Trianon at Versailles. So it's not big. And so Louis comes there, and he sees this, and he's just jealous. He's just like, oh, what's going on here? And then everybody was like, where did he get the money? He's in charge of the finances. How did he get all this money? Maybe he stole it from you. So everybody would tell Louis this. And so then Louis, he ended up having him arrested. Mazarin, when the cardinal was alive, he was really protective of Fouquet. And after he died on March 9th, 1661, it was kind of, he was just kind of on his own. And then Colbert, his minister, was the one who was always telling. He was very suspicious of anybody close to the king. And so he had told him, this guy's probably doing something bad. So on September 5th, 1661, another name you might know from Dumas, D'Artagnan, and I think I said that wrong, but he ended up going and under Louis XIV's orders, arresting him and taking him off to jail. And he ended up getting sent out to Vincennes. And then after that, he was brought to the Bastille, where he stayed while they had his court case. And then after that, it was just pretty much, the court case was just kind of a joke to even do it. But you could read all about it because Madame de Sévigné, who we talked about a couple years ago, she was the one that wrote all the letters to her daughter in the south of France, and she documented the entire trial. But he ended up getting shipped off to Italy, and he died in prison there. But they ended up bringing his body back, and he's buried at the church just about a block from the Bastille.
It was such a bad idea to have a party. He should have just kept his money to himself.
He should have just kept his money to himself, but he had more money than the king. And but then what Louis XIV did is he went and was like, this looks all pretty cool. So what does he do? At that time, Louis is living in Paris at the Louvre. So he decided to steal all of his workers, Laveau, Lebrun, and Le Nôtre, and then he decided to go out and build Versailles.
He was inspired.
Yeah, and there's a book that I read. It was the man who outshone the Sun King, and I read this book like 10 years ago, and it's all about Nicolas Fouquet, and how and basically how Louis felt about him. But he thought of he thought he was stealing from from Louis and from France. But really, and it's been proven now that it's just that he had an insane amount of money on his own.
So he really never stole anything?
He didn't steal anything, no.
I wonder why they shipped him to Italy to go to prison. Why not put him in Italy and France?
I don't know. Yeah, they shipped him. I mean, for a while he was over like in near the Alps, and then they ended up sending him down to Italy, and then that's where he died. But then they brought him back.
Poor guy.
No, the poor guy. So, but there's the Bastille had all of these people, but the funniest thing. So on July 14th, 1789, everybody they were getting so mad and outraged at the way that everything was going on in Paris. And so everybody was standing up, and they were mad that they were hungry. They were mad that they didn't have any money. They were mad that the king was keeping everything. And so they decided to stand up against this. And this is before, a couple of weeks ago, we did the one about Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette leaving and trying to escape. So this is before all of that. So this is kind of what most people call the first, some people say that this is when the revolution started. Technically, it actually started before this. But a lot of people, there's a lot of misconceptions about everything about this day. But the people were just outraged. And so they went to Les Invalides, which is where Napoleon is buried now. But they went to Les Invalides to go in there and to steal arms and weapons and ammunition. And out of some crazy stroke of luck, they had moved all of the ammunition and powder to the Bastille the day before. So they get in and they break into Les Invalides, and they go in there and they get all the guns, and they're looking everywhere, and they're like, well, where's all the powder? Where's all the ammunition? And they find out that it's at the Bastille. So they grab all of these weapons, and it's about 1,000 people, and they go down to the Bastille, and they're yelling and screaming outside, and they're telling them to let them in, and they're coming in there for the guns, and they're letting all the prisoners go. And there was a huge, it went for hours of negotiations, and then finally they dropped the drawbridge down because the guards that were in the Bastille were going to come out, and they were just going to shoot it out. And as they dropped the drawbridge, it ended up killing like 20 people.
Oh my God.
But they ended up getting in, and they just started throwing everything they could find out the windows, furniture and documents and the archives and everything else that was kept there at the Bastille. And then they went to go find the prisoners. And do you know how many prisoners that there were at the time?
Wasn't there just like one or something?
Close, 7.
It's like nobody there.
When I first heard about this story, like, I don't know, 20 years ago, I was imagining that, there's just thousands of prisoners running through the streets. And then when I learned that it was 7 people, and of these 7 people, 4 of them were counterfeiters. So it's not like, the man in the iron mask. 4 of them were counterfeiters. One gentleman, Count Hubert de Soule, he was there because he kidnapped and was an incest. So that's pretty horrific.
Oh my God.
But then there was another gentleman named Auguste Tavernier, who was the accomplice of Robert Francois Demian, who tried to kill Louis XV. And then there was a count there, the Count of White de Melville. He was locked up because his family, he started suffering from what we now as dementia. And his family was like, we don't know what to do with him. So can we just send him to the prison?
Oh my gosh, that's horrible.
And so when we talked, I don't know how long it was, 6 months or so, when we did the poison affair. And there was the one woman where the husband found out his wife had been cheating. And so the husband basically went and said, can you go find that guy, lock him up because he's cheating. He's my, wife.
So
and they're like, okay.
They didn't pick the best ones.
They didn't pick the best ones. So when the revolutionists found this out, they were really upset, and they actually made up of somebody. And so they said that they found this man. He was named the Count of Lorge, and that he was just horrible. And he was found locked up in chains and inside of a cage. And he was half naked and he was covered in hair, and his beard was matted and just gross. And he looked horrific. So they tried to make it sound like there was somebody, but really it was just some people that, counterfeited some documents.
I love that story so much.
Be hilarious. But because there was this huge shootout, over 1,000 people were there. Good 250 of them died in this moment, and it just became into this huge shootout. And they didn't nothing really, it didn't get much farther than that. And then everything that was being thrown out the windows, and people were going back later, and some people were grabbing these archives and things that they were being thrown out, and then they were taking them later to the local government office. But that's what most people think that Bastille Day is about. And I think because it's called Bastille Day and everywhere in the English speaking world, that is what people think, but it actually isn't. So the very next year, on that same date, in July 14th, 1790, they threw this huge event on the Champ Mars. And this thing was called the Fête de la Fédération, and the Fête de la Fédération. And at this is when still Louis the 16th, he and Marie Antoinette are still able to roam around, and they were there. And at this point, now he's living living there, and he comes out to this, and he takes this oath, saying that he's taking this oath to the nation, and everybody is like, vive le roi, like cheering for him. Marie Antoinette comes forward with her son, the Dauphin, and everybody's cheering, long live the queen, long live the queen. And there was this huge party. So there was like 4,000 people walked from the Bastille to Champ Mars, there where the Eiffel Tower is now, which I would never sit there for a picnic because I've seen way too many rats. But there is, they walked all the way down there, and then there was like 60,000 people sitting around there. They built like these stands, and, of course there's no buildings. Like, this was way outside the city then. So when you think of it now, I mean, that's still, you could put thousands of people there, but the space was really, really big. And so that is actually why they picked July 14th, is because they actually, when they call it the Fête de la Nation, that is the actual event that they are referring to, not the storming of the Bastille.
Oh, that's so interesting. I thought it was the opposite. I thought it was the storming of the Bastille too. And it's funny because now everyone gathers there to watch fireworks every year.
I know it is. And it is actually, there was other times that there was huge, Champ de Mars. Mars is, the god of war. And so there used to be huge battles there, and lots of people died. And now there's just rats everywhere.
Big difference. Now you get to watch a pretty fireworks show with an orchestra.
Yeah. So, but then later, so this didn't start, they didn't start, right from then. 1791 didn't roll around, and then now it's like, oh, okay, it's the 14th of July. It took another 100 years. So on June 30th, 1878, they ended up having, this was 8 years after the siege of Prussia. People were just like not in a good place. Everybody, people were starving. Then you had the commune in 1871, which we've talked about, and how they were burning all these buildings down, and people were mad because how they were treated and hungry. And, pretty much all of this comes down to, as you said before, being hangry.
Yeah, hangry is a real problem, guys. We've seen it in history. You must be careful.
It's pretty much that, people just need a jambon beurre. But on June 30th, they called it this day that it was going to be the National Day for Peace and Work. And so they did it on the last day of the Universal Exhibition that year. And they basically said, everywhere you go, wherever you live, your business, everything, put out a French flag. And so one of my very favorite paintings in the Orsay depicts this, and it's the painting by Monet of the Rue Montorgueil. He did a second one that's Rue Saint-Denis, which is in another, I think it's in the Rouen Museum. But it's one of my favorite ones, and it's been gone for a year, and it's just been back in the last couple of weeks. And it just looks down the street of all of these flags, of these French flags. And Monet was just walking down the street, and he just went up to the store and said, "Can I come up and use your window to paint?" And these people said, "Okay."
That's shocking.
Yeah. And by that point, Monet was kind of, people knew who he was. And so, but that, a lot of people think that painting is about Bastille Day, but it also, because of that, it was in 1880, on July 6, 1880, the Minister Raspail, he ended up passing a law that basically said that on July 14th was going to be a national holiday. So it basically, the very first one was 1880. And it started with a military parade. It was at the Longchamp race course. And still to this day, that military parade is the longest running military parade in the world.
I know that they were taking forever to train for this year on the Champs-Elysees because I had to do photo shoots and I tried to cross the Champs-Elysees and they're like, nope. And all the soldiers were there and you had to take the metro to just get across the street.
Yeah, because it was at like 5 a.m.
Yeah, they trained in the early hours and
And a couple days before that, I was at home, and you're not allowed to fly over Paris. So you'll never, like, if you hear helicopters, you're always like, okay, well, something's obviously going on, because you're not allowed to. So a couple days before that, I was home in the afternoon doing some work, and I was like, what is that noise? And then I realized the flyover was practicing too.
Yeah, they did a lot of practice flyover and a lot of practice marching.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. So that is basically why Bastille Day is, well, it is 14 juillet. So it's Fête de la Nation, Nationale. And so that is what it is. But it really has nothing to do with the Bastille. And it kind of drives me crazy when I see like the Alliance Française in the US on their Instagram, and they always call it Bastille Day. And I'm like, you are supposed to be French language. You should not be calling it the Bastille.
I love that.
I'm too busy taking on my, Everybody Knowing the Truth by Coco Chanel. I can't take everything on.
Yeah, you can't take it all on.
But back at the Bastille, what we know, we'll talk more about it in 2 weeks. But after that happened, Napoleon, the very next day on July 15th, they ended up selling it to hiring this gentleman named Pierre-François Pallier. He was hired to tear down the Bastille, and he was quite smart because he started selling off the stones as souvenirs. He sold them off to somebody that then would carve them into miniature versions of the Bastille. And you could see one of these in the Carnival. And it's huge. I mean, these are huge stones. These weren't like cobblestones, like when they're like, 4 by inches, 4 by 4. Yeah. These are pretty huge stones. So you can see it if you go to the top level of Carnival. It's all about the revolution. And there's one there. There's also a key there. There's also a key in Mount Vernon in the U.S. that Lafayette gave to George Washington. But they started taking it down, but it would end up taking about 8 years for it to fully come down. And then it was under Napoleon that he wanted it to be raised. And he said that he wanted it to be done, and it would be done on the anniversary of his coronation, because he always loved that. So December 2nd, 1808 is when the first stone was laid. And he said he wanted it done in 2 years. And what it was going to be was going to be a fountain of a giant bronze elephant. And this thing was going to be massive. And I'll put some pictures on the website, my website of it. There's like etchings of it and drawings of it. And this thing was going to be just huge. And so it took too long. So they put the base in, and of course it just was taking a long time. And then there was, crusades, and then, running out of money and everything. And so it never got off the ground. He did have a whole replica of it built, just like he did at Arc de Triomphe in wood. And that actually stood for quite a while. And if you've read Les Miserables, they reference this elephant quite a bit, because Victor Hugo lived very close to that, and he just lived a street away, and he would see it. But he picked the elephant because that was something he saw when he went on these campaigns down in the Middle East. But it never came to light, sadly. But the base of what is the column now is the base that was built for the elephant.
Oh, so they actually did get some use out of it.
Done, but it was going to be really cool. Like the elephant's trunk was going to be like a fountain, and water was going to come out.
I wish it was an elephant.
I know, that would be so cute, but there's much more to it. But we'll talk about that in 2 weeks, because it's also a big event day that happened there. And it's the 3 glorious days that happened. That was the revolution that also brought us my favorite painting by Delacroix.
All right, guys, well, you heard it. Tune in for the next episode and check out Claudine's website, ClaudineHemingway.com, to learn more. And don't forget to contact us on social media, connect with us, email. We love hearing from you.
Thanks for listening today, guys. If you're interested in learning more about Claudine, her tours, history, and the beautiful photographs that she posts all over Instagram, tune into her website, claudinehemingway.com.